in. Settle back. It's curtain time at the Story Lane Theater. You've never seen a stage like this one. Anything can happen here. Today's story is called Mose the Fireman. It takes place in the 1800s in New York City. New York was a much different place back then. Most of the buildings were made of wood, so in crowded neighborhoods, fires could be a big problem. And that's where Mose fit in. But before we get to Mose's story, we're going to stop off at this old firehouse, once known as Engine Company Number 30, and now known as the New York City Fire Museum. The man you see inside the museum is Don Cannon. He's a volunteer fireman, a historian, and an expert on the ways people have fought fires from the beginning of history to the present.
I've always felt that fighting fires and studying and learning how to discipline myself and learning how to work with others and going through all the tough times in the street and in buildings is kind of like the price of admission to a community of people who you really know are good people. All firefighters are supposed to work in teams. You need each other to stay alive. You're working together towards a common objective, and you each depend on the other to complete the task together. For any firefighter, the height of his or her career would be to save a life. And they can go on with their lives and live a good life themselves. I was really delighted the first time that I read the story of Mose. He was such an attractive figure to me. Tough, rough and ready, heart of gold, loyal, energetic. Mose represented a stereotype of the Bowery boy, the newly arrived, brash immigrant type. And they were looked down upon by a lot of people as being a crude, a bunch of ruffians. But he demonstrated, and he represented to the larger community, that these were good people, that they loved the city in their own way, and they would risk their lives to protect their neighborhoods. When fires broke out in Mose's day, the firefighters would be awakened by the deep, deep sound of the tower bells in the district where the fire originated. Mose's experience is very common. Snug abed, aroused by the bells of the fire alarm tower, jumping into his pants and boots neatly laid by the side of his bed, going out into the cold, dark, running, hearing the footsteps of other volunteers running to the firehouse, pulling this 1,000-pound hand-pumping engine, exhausted, racing to the fire. And then they had to find either a pond or a stream and connect into it through a hydrant or a plug with their leather hoses and start pumping. And each company tried to be the first engine in at a fire. And the honor of putting first water on a fire was a great one at that point. Fireman Mose would have looked at his world in much the same way that firefighters do today. I think that the people you work with, or people he worked with, were closely connected. They shared experiences, evoked the same kind of passionate loyalty and affection that fire companies do in Baltimore or Pittsburgh or Chicago today. I really think that whatever the time, whatever the place, I think there's a real understanding that rises above time and rises above place. There's a shared respect for life and for each other and for people. The sum total of everybody working together is quite astonishing.
Thanks for your thoughts, Don. And now, let's watch the story of Mose the Fireman.
Excuse me. Excuse me. I hate to bother you, but I just wanted to ask you if by any chance you'd ever heard of a guy by the name of Mose the fireman. Moses Humphreys was his real name, and he was the greatest firefighter who ever lived. And this is going way back now. In fact, this goes so far back that New York City was so new it still had a price tag on it. But seriously, this is a long, long time ago. It's even before subways was invented. Now, to begin at the beginning, Mose Humphreys was born in 1809 in a tenement on the Lower East Side of New York. The same year Abraham Lincoln was born in a log cabin on the plains of Illinois. Anyhow, that winter there was a big fire in New York. Every fireman in the city was there trying to put it out. It burned all through the night, destroying block after block of wooden houses. It was very sad. You see, they didn't have too many fire plugs at that time, so they had to pump the water right out of whatever river or pond or puddle or whatever was close by. Anyhow, just as they was putting out the last fire, there was a big explosion. Boom! That blasted the top half of the building into a million pieces. Now, most of it landed in the icy waters of the East River, and everyone who had been trapped inside was given up for dead. But not long after that, one of the firemen from Engine Company Number 40 heard a cry from down by the river. And right there, lying in a busted hogshead among the frozen cattails, they found a little red-headed baby. Well, the firemen of Number 40 decided to adopt the little guy right then and there, and because of the way they'd found him, they decided to name him Moses, after a guy who was also found floating in a river, although not in the East River and not in New York. And so Moses it was, although practically everybody just called him Mose. And so Mose grew up in a firehouse. He took his first bath inside a fire helmet, and they used a big coil of hose for his playpen. Now, as you already know, firefighting was a very primitive operation back in the old days. To begin with, they had only one piece of equipment called an engine, which was really just a big clunky water pump on wheels. And because all the firemen were volunteers in those days, whenever the fire bell sounded, they would all stop whatever they was doing, run to the firehouse and haul the old engine out, and then they'd drag it to the fire themselves with ropes, which was no piece of cake. You see, it wasn't until many years later that they figured out they could get horses to do it. These guys were not exact valedictorians. Pretty soon, they'd let Mose ride to the fire with them, and he'd watch as the fire marshal shouted orders to everybody through a silver-speaking trumpet. "Man the brakes," he'd say. The brakes were the big handles that pumped the water. "Man the brakes! Watch that hose there! Step lively, boys! Can the mongoose!" And the men would pump up and down on the brakes as fast as they could, and this would suck the water out of the wooden pipes that ran along most of the main roads and shoot it out the other end. It was hard work. Well, Mose grew up fast, and pretty soon he was right in there with them, hauling the engine. And not long after that, he was so big and strong that they just let him pull it all by himself. Now the engine at Company Number 40 was called Lady Washington, that's George's wife, and there wasn't a more beautiful piece of equipment anywhere. And whenever the fire bell sounded, Mose was always the first one ready to holler off. You see, Mose was never one to fool around with the stairs. He'd just throw his boots out the window and take a flying leap right after them, putting them on as he fell, and landing without a hitch. It got where he could jump out the window, shave, comb his hair, brush his teeth, eat some oatmeal, read 3 chapters of a good book, drink some coffee, without spilling a drop. Mose is some kind of fireman. Now, I wouldn't want to give you the idea that Mose and the Bowery boys of Company Number 40 were the only ones fighting fires in New York. There were fire companies all over this city, and every company thought their engine was the best, so I guess you could say they had a little rivalry going on between them. Whenever a fire alarm went off, 3 or 4 companies would all race to the fire at once, hoping to be the one to tap the fire plug and have the honor of holding the hose and putting out the fire. One time, 2 companies got into a brawl over a plug while the very fire they should have been putting out continued to burn. Now Mose and Sykesy, who was Mose's best pal, couldn't believe what they were seeing. They had to do something. Who needs a fire plug anyway? Mose shouted. Come on, Sykesy, let's go. So Mose grabbed a pickaxe and just made a hole in the pipe itself. Sykesy, take the butt, he shouted. Sykesy grabbed the nozzle and pointed it at the fire, and then Mose stuck the other end right into the hole he'd made in the water pipe and began pumping the engine brakes all by himself. The water shot out with such force that the fire was out in no time, and Sykesy had to hose down the brawling companies just so he could tell them to go home. That cooled him off. Now, as you probably already figured out, the Bowery was kind of a wacko place. There were live pigs running wild through the streets, rooting around to eat whatever scraps of food they could find. And whenever you turned, there were chimney sweeps and vendors of all kinds selling onions and whatnot. And there were guys with carts that sold steaming hot yams and fresh apples and baked pears dripping with syrup. I'm getting hungry just thinking about it. Somebody run down and get me a cannoli. And each of these characters would have a song that they would sing, like the guy who sold clams would sing. My clams I want to sell today, the best clams from Rockaway. Hey! But the most popular street food of them all was the boiled ears of corn that were carried in cedar buckets by the white corn gals of the Bowery. Well, one day as Mose was swaggering down the Bowery with Sykesy, he spotted a white corn gal named Lize. And it might be a corny way of putting it, but when she sang, her voice was as sweet as the corn she sold. Hot corn, here's your lily white corn. All you that's got money, poor me that's got none. Buy my lily white corn and let me go home. What an attitude. But hey, this is New York we're talking about. Besides, he sold corn, am I right? Well, what can I say? Mose was gaga, head over heels in love. Now, the natural thing for a Bowery boy to do when he was in love was to ask his gal to go to the fireman's ball with him. But somehow, Mose just couldn't get up the nerve. You see, without some big scary fire roaring around him, Mose was as shy as could be. And so, he'd just buy some corn and be on his way. Well, pretty soon, the fireman's ball is right around the corner, and Mose still hasn't asked her. But lucky for Mose, there was a big fire over on Delancey Street. That was some blaze, all right. The flames shot way up over the top of a 4-story building, which was the tallest building there was in New York at that time. And it presented some real problems for the firemen because they didn't have ladders that could get up that high. Mose was on the scene in a flash, with the Bowery boys at number 40 right behind him. The building was covered in flames, and it looked like it was going to collapse at any minute. Then, all of a sudden, they heard his voice calling for help. And then Mose saw her, on the 4th floor, right through the burning flames. It was Lize, his white corn gal. Without even stopping to think, he ran over to a shipbuilder's joint and grabbed the tallest ship's mast he could find. Then, like the lunatic that he was, he sprinted toward the burning building and pole vaulted right up to the 4th floor. Well, what with all those flames roaring around him, Mose felt like his usual brave self. So then and there, on the windowsill, with the building about to collapse and the fire so hot that they were both sweating bullets, Mose asked Liza if she'd go to the fireman's ball with him. Well, what's she gonna say? "I'd love to," she said, and that was that. That's all Mose needed to hear. He was so happy he couldn't contain himself. He grabbed Liza and was just about to jump out the window with her, but then he realized he should probably do something a little more civilized, what with her being a real lady and all. So, holding on to Liza with his right arm and the ship's mast with the other, he slid all the way down to the ground. It was a straight shot, no traffic. Oh, by the way, that's how the fire pole was invented. I bet you didn't know that, did you? You probably thought it was Ben Franklin or Tom Edison who invented it, didn't you? Well, it was Mose who did it, and if photography had been popular then, I'd show you pictures to prove it. Well, it wasn't long before the fireman's ball rolled around. Mose got all gussied up for it. Although no Bowery boy ever went anywheres without wearing his red flannel fire shirt. You see, you could never tell when there was going to be a fire, and you had to be prepared. But because of his love for Liza, Mose put on a white dickie over the top of it. Very classy. Of course, Liza didn't look so bad herself. She was a sight for sore eyes. The two of them danced all through the night. It was Mose's dream come true. Well, Mose wasn't one to waste time, and after a couple of hours of dancing with Liza, he was all set to propose marriage. That's all there was to it. So he wiped his mouth on his sleeve, and he cleared his throat, and he said, "Liza, will you—" But just as he was getting to the point, Mose heard a distant sound. A bell, coming from the direction of City Hall. Being the remarkable fireman that he was, he could hear it over all the music that the orchestra was playing. "Fire!" Mose shouted with all his might. "Fire! Turn out, boys! Turn out!" With that, every man in the place dropped whatever he was doing and ran for the nearest exit. But by the time they got to the fire, it had already burned several blocks. It was the worst fire New York had ever seen. Every single company in the city was there. Mose was up and down ladders rescuing people all through the night. But it was a losing battle. It just wasn't enough water, and the fire continued to burn, out of control. After a while, it began to look completely hopeless. Mose sighed, the saddest sigh ever sighed. Gotham would never be the same. From where he was, Mose could see the Hudson River at the edge of the island. It was all so sad, all that water, and no way to get it to the fire. But then, suddenly, Mose, lunatic that he was, got a crazy idea. A cockamamie, not-so-wacko idea. Although somehow, the more he thought about it, the less nuts it seemed. Without a moment to waste, Mose jumped down to the ground and grabbed the biggest shovel he could find. Then he rolled up his sleeves and started digging a hole in the general direction of New Jersey. Sykesy just looked at him.
"Hey, this ain't no time for chasing groundhogs," he said. "For crying out loud, what's the matter with you? The whole town's burning down."
But by that time, Mose was already underground and headed due west.
"Hey, Mose," Sykesy shouted. "Hey, where you going?"
"Where do you think?" he shouted back. "To get water!" Well, that's all Mose had to say. He always kept his word, and Sykesy knew Mose would be back with water, just like he said. In a little while, practically everybody in town was standing there looking into the hole and just waiting for Mose to reappear. Then, suddenly, there was a loud pop, followed by the sound like a tidal wave might make, and then, kapoosh! Up shot Mose like a spooked fish with the Hudson River right behind him. Then, without wasting a second, Mose picked up Lady Washington all by himself and wedged her into the hole as tight as possible. "All right, everybody," he said. "We're gonna have to work together. Hook every hose up to Lady Washington. Don't nobody crowd around. There's enough H2O for every one of you bums. And hurry it up, 'cause there ain't much time." Well, every company did as they were told, and the minute all the hoses were hooked up, Mose started upping the brakes. He was moving so fast, it looked like a blur on top of a blur on top of a hallucination. But then, all of a sudden, it happened. Water began to shoot out of all those hoses at once, and the pressure in each hose was so unbelievable that it took every single man in each company just to keep them under control. In fact, there was so much water coming out of those hoses that the fire didn't know which way to turn. It just freaked out. I guess you could say that the fire had met its match. You got it. Well, Mose continued pumping the brakes so fast that in no time at all, every single flame and every last ember was extinguished. Bada bing. Just like that, it was over. Mose had saved New York. The whole city erupted with cheers. "Hooray for Mose!" everyone shouted. "Hooray for the king of the Bowery! Mose has done it again!" Now, of course this was true, but Mose was a very humble guy. He couldn't stand being the center of attention. "I'm just doing my duty," he said. You see, when you're as much of a hero as Mose was, you do stuff like drain the Hudson River without blinking. It's just what you do. Well, people kept on cheering, and the noise was so loud that Mose had to scream his marriage proposal to Liz, who screamed back her answer, which was absolutely yeah, definitely, no question about it, yes. And since everybody was already dressed for the occasion, they all went back up to the firehouse for the wedding, and that was it, bada bing, married. Oh, by the way, after Mose had gotten through with the Hudson, it took so long to fill back up that for weeks you could just walk right over to Jersey, which is not the brightest idea in the world, but hey, free country, you want to go to Jersey, go to Jersey. And as for the tunnel he dug, it just kind of sat there for a while. But after a couple of years, somebody got an idea about putting train tracks down there on account of it would be nice and quiet and out of the way. And that's how the subways came into being. Go figure. So, I guess you could say Mose even had a hand in inventing the subways. But hey, nobody's perfect, am I right? Of course I am.